Hello, welcome to the Online Strength Coach Podcast, episode 93. Today's question is is in relation to conditioning. The question comes from Dave. Slow, steady jogging or interval training on the stationary bike. Both done for around the same time, half an hour or so. Both the same, or is one better than the other? Okay, so basically what we have here, we'll discuss through the merits of on-feet and off-feet conditioning, as we term it, and we'll also discuss the merits of steady state or capacity work versus interval or power work when it comes to conditioning. First and foremost, when it comes to on-feet versus off-feet, so on-feet we typically term as any kind of running-based conditioning, any kind of high energetic training. So obviously within the confines of rugby training, that pertains to running around con games, sprinting, contact drills, anything where there's a lot of movement about, and running certainly would constitute on-feet conditioning. Where this is useful is it's a lot easier to get into higher heart rate zones. It's a lot easier to get into more of a higher intensity activity, get much higher calorie expenditures as well, if that's what you're about, if that's what you want to do. The positive side is it's a lot easier to do high intensity work. The negative side of that is there's a lot of joint impact, there's a lot of load being taken through the body. Too much of it does increase your chance of injury, or it puts you at more at risk from an overuse or any form of injury perspective. If you train football or you're any kind of athlete that does a team sport, or you're a distance runner, it's a completely unavoidable aspect of your training. It's something that you need to do. But from a loading standpoint, it's something that we would watch quite closely if I was one of your sports staff on your sports science team, on your conditioning team. So on the off-feet conditioning side of things, it becomes more difficult to get into higher heart rate zones. The transfer can be less. So if you're a rugby player, a football player, an endurance trained athlete, such as a marathon runner or a middle distance runner, conditioning that is done on a bike, conditioning that's done on a rower, conditioning that's done on a versi climber, ski erg, aerodyne, anything that's done off feet where you're not directly loading. Some of the peripheral adaptations that you'll get from running, so capillary density through the legs, muscular endurance, calf endurance, from applying your force over and over again in a fatigue state. A lot of these adaptations that transfer directly into your sport or directly into your activity, you will not get from off-feet conditioning. What you'll get is you'll get a better stroke volume, your lung capacity will increase, you'll get all of the central adaptations that come from cardiovascular training. So central adaptations are things that deal primarily with the heart and lungs. So, for example, for the lungs, increasing of lung capacity, the amount of oxygen you can intake, that's a central adaptation. For the heart, increase of stroke volume, the amount of blood you can pump with one effort, that's a central demand, that's a central adaptation. These things will transfer into any endurance-related activity that you do. However, there will be a lag on that adaptation because you'll need to get the peripheral adaptations that are going to make you better conditioned for that discrete activity. So, for example, if someone suffers an upper body injury, then we want to get them active as quickly as we can. Often the first thing we can get them doing, or one of the first things we can get them doing that's useful, is get them to sit on a bike. Normally it's steady state to begin with because they can't load through a limb, they can't put too much effort through it in case they knock it or load it, or they compromise the surgery or compromise the joint. So we'll do a lot of steady state work. Steady state is more about time and zone. So let's say, for example, there's 3 weeks where we can't really do anything that's full noise. Then that athlete might start off with 30 minutes a day, between 70 to 85% heart rate, and then over the 3 weeks, maybe, so that's 3.5 hours in the week. Maybe over time we build that up to 12 hours, 15 hours in the week where they spend time in zone. They will get central adaptations from that. They will get peripheral adaptations to that. So they'll get, for example, capillary density within the legs. They will get muscular endurance within the legs as relation to sitting on a bike and turning over. They'll get these adaptations which will make them better adapted from a peripheral standpoint to sitting on a bike for a period of time, turning the legs over. But the central adaptations they'll get will help them later down the track. So then when we go on to interval-based training, or we go to running, maybe go to running intervals, they'll find that first session incredibly difficult. Their calves will cramp, their lower back will cramp. They'll find that they reach higher heart rates much, much quicker because they're applying their own force, they're accepting their own force, applying their own force. They'll basically find everything a lot more difficult. But what'll happen is they'll adapt to the training a lot quicker. So if we do like 2 or 3 running interval-based sessions in the week, by session 3, they might start adapting and feeling a lot better. Whereas we didn't do that steady state based training, or we didn't get those central adaptations. When we go into a running environment or a running scenario, that's going to be a much longer time for that athlete to adapt, because they're going to have to achieve both the central and the peripheral adaptations. They're starting from a lower VO2 max, they're starting from a lower stroke volume, they're starting from a lower lung capacity, they have a lower red blood cell count, etc., because they've been stationary, so they're coming from more of a detrained state. So a lot of times when you deal with an injured athlete, they'll question your modalities because they're boring. But these are the reasons why you can only do so much thing and be safe, do so many things and be safe within that environment. So sometimes it's got to be boring. You're and eventually training is about achieving physiological adaptation. Your body is there to be trained. You're not there to be entertained. I'm put that on a t-shirt. So yeah, so that's where like steady state is useful within an injured standpoint, but also hopefully now you have an understanding of what like a central adaptation is and what a peripheral adaptation is. Now, if we're just conditioning for general fitness, it depends on the frequency you have. It depends on what you're conditioning for. So, Dave, I know you've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the past, and what I'm going to infer is that you're maybe conditioning, maybe not just for general fitness, but also to help you with BJJ. The first question we got to ask is, what's the frequency of conditioning training? If your frequency is 1 or 2 sessions a week, interval training is without question what you should be doing, because you'll get yourself into higher heart rate zones. You'll spend more time at 90% plus heart rate, which means that you're going to get more adaptation out of that because your body's going to go into more stress. If we're talking 4 sessions a week, then we'll look at doing 2 interval-based trainings and 2 steady state sessions, because we get different adaptations from steady state that we don't necessarily get from interval training. Interval training is more of a bang for your buck, but the steady state helps us with things like efficiency. It can help accumulate time in zone, which is increases aerobic capacity, which is an important adaptation to have if you're engaged in any form of endurance-based sport. Helps with the recovery times. Steady state's a very good thing to be in your program. If you have 4 or 5 sessions to do, I would go for a 1-on-1 split, and 30 minutes is fine. For your steady state, if you don't have a heart rate monitor, getting one would be very useful, and I've looked to stay within sort of 70 to 85% heart rate. And then for your endurance training, look to spend as much time as you can above 80% and hopefully get into those 90% zones. The reason why I wouldn't advise you to do 4 interval training sessions, even though it is the more prolific or the biggest bang for buck, as we said before, is it becomes very fatiguing if you do a lot of it. It's a very powerful conditioning tool, but something that needs to be used with a bit of sense, depending on your training level. If you're a highly trained endurance athlete, then you maybe do 4 or 5 interval training sessions a week, although you probably wouldn't do as much, maybe 3, 4. As a lesser trained athlete, then 2 is a very good frequency to utilise. You'll definitely get fitter using 2 of those sessions a week, especially for 30 minutes. 30 minutes is a good session time for interval training, and then 2 kind of easier sessions, the long slow jogs or the steady state jogs. So they're both useful. They both will help you get conditioned, although they both have different kind of uses, different modalities. And also you can think about if you want to do your interval training on feet, because that's going to make it even more prolific. But then we're looking at more impact, a lot more stressful, joint sneezing things. So maybe we're better off looking at like the long, slow, steady state stuff on feet and off feet. We can maybe do the higher intensity interval training, because that's going to reduce the fatigue element a fair bit. It's actually interesting. I've not done my review this month, but last month, the JSCR review, there was a study that showed they looked at the same interval training protocol, but one was done with running or cardiovascular equipment, and one was done with like body weight, so the high intensity interval training sort of stuff you see, like the Les Mills something fit, I can't remember. It's like the Crazy Fit or the Meta Fit, where they do a lot of burpees, jumps, press ups, body weight based conditioning. That kind of conditioning had a much higher fatiguing rate. Like there was a lot more catabolic hormones. There's a lot stress markers within the blood was raised. Neurologically, the participants were a lot more fatigued for longer after that kind of body weight sort of conditioning, even though that might not be considered on-feet training. So something to think about as well is the residual fatigue of your sessions. And the heart and lungs are adaptation machines. They recover incredibly quickly from training, and they can handle massive volumes, whereas your muscles, joints and tendons, they're not so good at the old adaptation game, and you need to be a lot more smarter with how you handle those. So yeah, hopefully that's answered your question in about a roundabout manner as possible as we do in this podcast. Hopefully, if you're listening, you've maybe picked up a couple of things on conditioning. Any questions you'd like me to answer, please send an email to speedpowerperformance@gmail.com. You can catch me on Facebook at Cast Iron Strength. Catch me online, onlinestrengthcoach.com, castironstrength.com. Thanks very much for listening. I'll catch you in the next episode. Cheers and goodbye.